He wanted to buy grain, but fate sold him an Apache woman. John Miller had always been a man of routine, a trader by trade, born and raised on the edge of the vast, untamed frontier. The dry winds of Santa Fe often carried whispers of danger, but John knew the land better than most. He knew the rivers and valleys, the paths less traveled, and even the stories that were told around the campfires of travelers passing through. Life was hard, but it was honest work. He made his living by trading goods, grain, cloth, tools, and sometimes horses. Every season, he journeyed across dusty trails to secure what his town needed. This year, as the days grew shorter and the autumn sun painted the mesas in gold and crimson, John realized it was time to stock up on grain. Winter would come soon, and the town needed food to survive the long months of cold and snow. He packed his wagon carefully, checking each item twice. The leather straps were strong, the wheels oiled, and the horses ready for the journey. John liked to be prepared. He had learned long ago that the wilderness was unforgiving. As he set off on the dusty trail leading to the nearest trading post, he felt a mixture of excitement and unease. The trail was familiar, yet the stories of the land were ever-changing. Some spoke of wild animals, others of bandits, and still others of tensions with the Apache tribes who lived further west. Though he had never had serious trouble with anyone on the trail, he respected it deeply. The land was not to be underestimated. Along the way, John passed small clusters of homes and farms. Children ran out to wave at him, and women called greetings from porches, their hands busy with chores. The smell of fresh bread baking in ovens drifted across the air, and John felt a warmth in his chest. He liked this life, the hard work, the simplicity, and the sense of community. But he also knew that beyond these small settlements, danger lurked. Stories of travelers being attacked or losing their way were common. Every decision, every turn in the trail had to be considered carefully. By mid-morning, John had reached a small clearing where he paused to rest the horses and eat. He opened a tin of dried meat and some bread, chewing slowly as he looked out over the rolling plains. The wind carried the scent of sagebrush, and he could see a hawk circling high above. He had always loved moments like this, when the world seemed vast and quiet, yet full of life. Travelers had a certain freedom, a connection to the land that townspeople often could not understand. John enjoyed being alone with his thoughts, yet he also knew that loneliness could be dangerous if one was not careful. As he prepared to continue, a group of traders appeared in the distance, their wagons covered with canvas and dust. They waved, calling greetings across the fields. John waved back and smiled, exchanging a few words as they passed. It was comforting to see friendly faces along the way. The traders spoke of the market ahead, warning of increased prices for grain and a shortage of supplies due to a recent drought. John frowned. The drought had affected many towns, and he knew that securing enough grain would not be easy. His journey might be longer and more complicated than he had hoped. Despite the warnings, John continued on, his mind focused on the task ahead. The trail grew rougher as he approached the foothills, rocks and roots threatening to tip the wagon. He guided the horses carefully, feeling the strain in his arms and back. The sun climbed higher and the heat pressed down on him, making the journey tiring. Yet he pressed on, determined to reach the trading post before nightfall. John knew that preparation and perseverance were what separated success from failure in these lands. As he neared the trading post, he noticed more travelers along the way. Some were merchants like him, looking to make deals and acquire goods. Others were families moving slowly, burdened with belongings, seeking safety or opportunity in new lands. The air was filled with chatter, the creaking of wagon wheels and the occasional laugh of children. John felt a mixture of relief and tension. Relief because he was nearing his goal, and tension because the marketplace could be unpredictable. Deals could be made or lost in an instant, and every trader had to be careful with whom they trusted. The trading post itself was a bustling hub of activity, a place where the frontier met the civilization of towns. Wooden buildings lined the dusty roads, and traders shouted offers and bargains to attract customers. Barrels of grain and sacks of flour were stacked high, and the smell of roasted coffee and fresh bread filled the air. Animals, from horses to chickens, wandered freely, adding to the lively chaos. John took a deep breath, feeling a mix of anticipation and caution. He had been here many times before, but each visit brought new challenges and surprises. He walked through the market, examining the grain and speaking with sellers. Prices were higher than he had expected, and quality varied greatly. John's trained eye could detect the difference between good grain and poor, and he inspected every sack carefully. He negotiated patiently, knowing that each coin counted. Each decision could affect his town's survival through the winter. Other traders watched him, some with respect, others with quiet envy. John had a reputation for fairness and skill, and he took pride in his ability to navigate these negotiations. As he concluded a deal for several sacks of wheat and corn, John heard murmurs among the crowd. Some traders were talking in hushed tones about unusual goods being offered, and one old man whispered a warning about the capture and trade of Apache women. John paused, curious but wary. He had heard rumors like this before, stories that seemed almost unbelievable. Yet the old man's tone carried a seriousness that made John uneasy. He shook his head and focused on his grain. He had a job to do, and he could not be distracted by gossip. Still, as he loaded the sacks onto his wagon, he felt a strange sense of unease. Something about the murmurs lingered in his mind, a shadow of tension that he could not shake. He glanced around, seeing traders haggling, children running, and horses stamping in the dust. Life continued around him, vibrant and chaotic, yet he felt a subtle shift, as if the world had a secret it was keeping just out of reach. John knew the frontier had its surprises, some good, some dangerous, and he reminded himself to remain vigilant. By late afternoon, with the sun beginning its descent, John prepared to leave the trading post. His wagon was loaded, the horses tired but strong, and his mind focused on the journey home. Yet as he looked back at the market, he noticed a small figure standing quietly in the crowd, observing him. There was something in the figure's eyes that made him pause, a presence that was calm yet intense. John could not place why, but he felt a ripple of curiosity and caution. He shook his head again, telling himself it was his imagination, and began guiding the wagon back onto the trail. As the shadows grew longer across the plains, John thought about the coming winter and the importance of the grain he had purchased. He thought about the families in Santa Fe, the children who would have food to eat, and the farmers who depended on him. Yet the memory of the figure in the crowd lingered, a quiet reminder that the frontier was unpredictable, and that sometimes fate had a way of surprising even the most careful traveler. With the wind at his back and the trail ahead, John pressed onward, unaware that the journey he had begun to secure simple grain would soon lead him into a story far more complicated and unexpected than he could imagine. The trail back from the trading post was long and tiring. The sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the plains with shades of orange and pink, and John Miller felt the familiar ache in his shoulders from guiding the loaded wagon. The grain sacks pressed heavily against each other, and the horses tramped steadily, their hooves kicking up clouds of dust. John had traveled this road many times before, but today something felt different. There was a certain tension in the air, almost like the land itself was holding its breath, waiting. As he moved along the winding trail, John noticed signs of recent travelers, broken branches, fresh tracks, and a campfire still warm from the night before. He slowed the horses, scanning the area with careful eyes. The frontier demanded constant vigilance. One careless moment could lead to lost goods, injured animals, or worse. John prided himself on being alert and cautious. He had heard stories of traders who had lost everything to thieves or wild animals, and he knew he could not afford to be careless. The sun was nearing the horizon when John spotted smoke rising in the distance. It was coming from a small clearing near the trail, where a trading post and a few makeshift tents had been set up. The sight made him relax slightly. He assumed these were fellow traders or travelers resting for the night, as he often did. As he approached, he was met with the familiar sounds of haggling voices, the clatter of wagons and the low neighing of horses. It was a lively scene, even as the day grew late. John guided his wagon toward the main area of the trading post, his mind already focused on setting up camp and resting for the night. He had no intention of lingering. He simply wanted to make the final arrangements for his grain and continue home before the next morning. Yet as he drew closer, he noticed something unusual. A small crowd had gathered around one of the traders, speaking in hushed tones. The voices were tense and the gestures were sharp. John's curiosity was piqued, though he tried to suppress it. He had learned long ago that some things in the frontier were best left alone. But as he moved closer, he heard words that made him pause. The trader was speaking of a young Apache woman, available for trade, and John could hardly believe what he was hearing. He slowed the horses, watching the scene unfold. The woman was standing quietly, her posture calm but dignified. Her dark eyes scanned the crowd, observing everything with quiet intelligence. She did not appear afraid, though the murmurs of the crowd suggested she should be. John felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had come to buy grain, not to deal with anything like this. The trader, noticing John's attention, waved him over. "You're a man of business," he said, "and I have something special for you. You want grain, yes. But perhaps you may also consider this young woman. She's strong, smart, and capable, could be useful on the trail." John's stomach churned. He did not know how to respond. He had never dealt with anything like this, and the very idea of trading for a human being made him uneasy. Yet the trader's words implied opportunity and practicality, something John had been trained to consider in the harshness of frontier life. John took a step back, running his hand over the grain sacks. He tried to focus on the business at hand, but he could not ignore the woman. She stood quietly, watching him with an intensity that made him feel exposed. There was a quiet strength in her eyes, a calm determination that contrasted with the chaotic atmosphere of the market. John felt a strange mix of curiosity, caution, and unease. He reminded himself that he was here to secure grain for his town, not to become involved in matters that were complicated and morally difficult. Still, the trader pressed the offer. "Think about it," he said. "Grain, yes, but this is more than that. She could help you on the journey. She knows the land, the ways of the tribes, and she is quick with her hands. Many would pay a great deal for someone like her." John's mind raced. The practical side of him considered the possibilities. Someone who could assist on the trail might make the journey safer and easier. Yet the moral side of him protested, questioning the rightness of the situation. He had grown up in the frontier and he had seen harsh realities, but this felt different. This felt like a test, a choice that could define his character. For a long moment, John said nothing. He studied the woman carefully, noting her posture, her expression, and the subtle strength in the way she held herself. She did not flinch, though the entire marketplace seemed to have its attention on her. She was clearly intelligent, aware, and resourceful. John could sense that she was not a passive figure in this transaction. She was a person with thoughts, feelings, and a presence that demanded recognition. This realization made his decision even more complicated. Finally, with a deep breath, John spoke. I will take the grain," he said carefully, "and I will take her as part of the arrangement. But understand this, I do not see her as property. She will have her freedom, her voice, and her choice." The trader raised his eyebrows, surprised by John's words. It was unusual for someone to speak this way in such a deal, where rules of trade often ignored morality. Yet John's words were firm, and the trader nodded, perhaps sensing that argument would be useless. The woman stepped forward then, her gaze meeting John's directly. There was a silent understanding in that look, a mixture of wariness, assessment, and subtle defiance. She did not speak immediately, but John could sense that she was measuring him, trying to understand his intentions. He felt a shiver of realization. This journey would be far more complicated than a simple trip to buy grain. He was not merely a trader now. He had entered a story much larger than himself, one that involved trust, respect, and survival. As they prepared to leave the trading post, John loaded the remaining grain into his wagon while the woman, who he now knew as Nayeli, gathered her few belongings. She moved with efficiency, handling the small bundle with care, never once complaining. John noticed how she treated the horses gently but firmly, and how she observed the trail ahead with a careful, practiced eye. He realized that despite the unusual circumstances, she was capable, resourceful, and resilient. He began to respect her skill, even as he wrestled with the moral complexity of the situation. The sun was setting as they finally left the trading post. The sky was ablaze with colors, and the plains stretched endlessly ahead of them. The wind rustled the dry grasses, carrying the scent of sage and distant pine. John guided the horses carefully, aware of the added responsibility of Nayeli's presence. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was a space filled with observation, calculation, and mutual understanding. John could sense that this journey would teach him much more than he had anticipated. As the evening deepened into night, John set up a small camp by the trail. He made a fire, preparing a simple meal of bread and dried meat. Nayeli sat across from him, watching quietly, her posture still composed, her eyes alert. John offered her some food, and she accepted without a word. The flickering firelight illuminated her features, and John found himself studying her carefully. He realized that she was not merely a companion for the journey. She was a person of intelligence, courage, and dignity. Her silence was not submission. It was observation, understanding, and careful thought. That night, as the stars blanketed the sky, John lay on his blanket beside the fire, reflecting on the day's events. He thought about the grain, the market, and the strange turn of fate that had brought Nayeli into his life. He felt a mixture of unease, curiosity, and respect. He knew that the road ahead would be challenging, not only because of the physical journey, but because of the delicate nature of trust, morality, and human connection. He realized that the frontier had more to teach him than he had ever imagined. And so, under the vast, starlit sky, the two of them settled in for the night. John knew that tomorrow would bring more travel, more challenges, and more opportunities to learn from each other. The grain he had sought was only the beginning of a story far greater than he had anticipated. He did not yet understand the lessons he would learn, the bonds he would form, or the dangers that lay ahead. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of calm, sitting beside the fire, watching the flickering flames, and contemplating the strange, unpredictable path that fate had set before him. The morning air was crisp as John woke to the first light of dawn. The sky was painted in soft shades of orange and gold, and the wind whispered through the tall grasses of the plains. The horses stirred in their harnesses, and Nayeli was already awake, quietly adjusting the few belongings she had brought with her. John watched her for a moment, impressed by her calmness and efficiency. Unlike many travelers he had met, she did not rush, complain, or demand attention. There was a quiet strength about her, a focus that spoke of intelligence and experience. John broke the silence first, offering her some bread and dried fruit for breakfast. Nayeli accepted with a simple nod, her dark eyes scanning the horizon as she ate. She did not speak much, but her presence was commanding. John had traveled with many companions over the years, some talkative, others silent, but few had commanded his attention in the same way. He realized that her silence was not shyness but a form of observation. She watched, studied, and understood before acting, and John found himself respecting that deeply. After breakfast, they loaded the wagon and continued along the dusty trail. The sun climbed higher and the air became warm, carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers. John guided the horses carefully, keeping an eye on the trail ahead. Naomi walked beside the wagon, her movements sure and deliberate. She pointed out small dangers, loose rocks, weak patches of earth, and even hidden animal burrows that John might have overlooked. Her knowledge of the land was impressive, and he realized that having her along could make the journey safer and more efficient. As they traveled, John attempted conversation. "How long have you been on the trail?" he asked cautiously. Naomi did not answer immediately, instead considering the question. Finally, she spoke in a calm, measured voice. "Long enough to know the ways of the land," she said. Her words were simple, but there was depth in them, an understanding born of experience. John nodded, realizing that this woman had survived challenges he could not even imagine. Her life before this moment had been shaped by the harsh realities of the frontier, and he felt both admiration and a growing sense of responsibility toward her. The day grew hotter, and the trail became more difficult. They passed through narrow passes and rocky ridges, testing the strength of the horses and the stability of the wagon. John noticed how Naomi adjusted her pace to match the terrain, moving silently and efficiently. She pointed out safe paths where the wagon would not get stuck and guided him around loose rocks that could have injured the horses. John began to see her as more than a companion. She was a partner, someone whose skills could mean the difference between success and disaster. Despite the growing heat, John could not ignore the tension he felt. He thought about the circumstances that had brought Naomi into his life. It had been a strange, unexpected turn of events, one that challenged his sense of right and wrong. He had intended only to buy grain, yet fate had placed this strong, intelligent woman by his side. He realized that his choices from this point onward would define not only his journey, but also the trust and respect between them. He vowed silently that he would treat her with fairness and dignity, no matter what challenges lay ahead. As they neared a small creek in the valley, John decided to take a short rest. He unhitched the horses and led them to the water, allowing them to drink and cool themselves. Naomi knelt by the creek, scooping water in her hands to drink, and then offered some to John. He accepted, noting the kindness and awareness in her gesture. There was a simplicity in these moments, water, food, and a shared pause in the midst of a long journey, but also a growing understanding between them. John began to see that the journey was not just about grain or survival. It was about trust, respect, and human connection. They traveled together for several more hours, the sun climbing higher and casting long shadows across the plains. As they moved, John noticed Naomi observing their surroundings carefully. She seemed to anticipate dangers before they appeared, tracks of wild animals, signs of unstable ground, and even the distant sound of a horse that did not belong on their trail. Her awareness was astonishing. John realized that her quiet demeanor was not weakness, it was strength, intelligence, and careful preparation. He felt a mixture of awe and reassurance, knowing that he was not alone in facing the challenges ahead. Around midday, dark clouds began to gather on the horizon. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and the distant rumble of thunder. John quickened his pace, wanting to find a safe place to set up camp before the storm hit. Naomi moved beside him without hesitation, pointing out natural shelters and higher ground that would remain dry. Her guidance was precise and confident, and John followed her lead. He could feel the growing bond between them, built not through words but through shared understanding and mutual respect. By late afternoon, they reached a small grove of trees near a gentle slope. It was the perfect place to rest and protect themselves from the approaching storm. John quickly began to set up a makeshift shelter with a canvas tarp, securing the wagon and ensuring the horses were safe. Naomi assisted, moving with quiet efficiency and offering suggestions that proved invaluable. Together, they worked as a team, and John felt a sense of camaraderie he had rarely experienced on his travels. He realized that trust was not something that could be demanded. It had to be earned through action, understanding, and respect. As the first drops of rain began to fall, they sat beneath the shelter, listening to the sound of water pattering against the tarp. John offered Naomi some of his bread, and she accepted with a small, appreciative nod. They ate in silence, comfortable in each other's company. The storm raged around them, yet inside the shelter, there was a sense of calm. John reflected on the events of the day, the journey, the challenges, and the unexpected companionship of Naomi. He realized that life on the frontier was full of surprises, and that sometimes the most difficult challenges could also bring the most meaningful connections. During the quiet moments of the storm, John began to speak more openly with Naomi. He asked her about her life, her experiences on the trail, and the lessons she had learned. Naomi responded thoughtfully, sharing stories of survival, observation, and resilience. She spoke of the importance of understanding the land, reading the signs of nature, and trusting one's instincts. John listened carefully, absorbing her wisdom and realizing how much he had underestimated the value of experience and knowledge. The conversation deepened their understanding of each other and laid the foundation for a strong partnership. As evening fell, the storm began to subside. The sky cleared, revealing a blanket of stars that stretched endlessly above the plains. John and Naomi sat quietly, watching the sky and reflecting on the day's journey. There was a sense of accomplishment and relief, but also a recognition that the road ahead would bring new challenges. John felt a growing admiration for Naomi, not just for her skills, but for her intelligence, courage, and calm presence. He understood that their journey together was shaping him as much as it was shaping her. Night settled over the plains, bringing with it the sounds of the wilderness. Crickets chirped, and the occasional howl of a distant coyote echoed across the valley. John lay on his blanket, listening to the rhythm of the night, and thought about the unexpected turn of events that had brought Naomi into his life. He realized that while he had begun the journey to buy grain, fate had given him something far more valuable, a chance to learn, grow, and form a bond with someone extraordinary. As they slept under the stars, John felt a sense of peace, knowing that he was not alone on the trail. Naomi's presence was both comforting and grounding, reminding him of the importance of trust, respect, and shared experience. The journey ahead would be long and challenging, but he was no longer traveling merely for grain or survival. He was traveling to understand, to learn, and to honor the strength and courage of the people who shared this land. And so, as the first light of dawn began to touch the plains, John and Naomi prepared to continue their journey. The trail ahead was uncertain, but they faced it together, each step a test of skill, judgment, and trust. John knew that the road would bring challenges, lessons, and moments that would test both of them. But for the first time in his travels, he felt that he was not merely a man on a trail. He was part of a story, one that involved courage, understanding, and a connection that transcended the boundaries of circumstance. The morning air was crisp and still, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant pine from the previous night's storm. John Miller stirred from his blanket, noticing the subtle shift in the wind. The plains stretched endlessly ahead, but he could sense movement in the distance, a subtle rustling among the grasses, a sound almost imperceptible if one were not paying attention. He rose carefully, wary of any danger that might be near. His travels had taught him that even a peaceful morning could hide unexpected threats. Naomi was already awake, crouched beside the wagon, checking the harnesses and inspecting the horses. She moved silently, her hands steady and confident, and John felt a sense of reassurance in her presence. There was a quiet strength in her actions, a calm awareness that he had come to rely on. She noticed John watching her and nodded briefly, a small acknowledgement that they were both alert and ready for the day ahead. The morning sun began to rise, casting long shadows across the trail, and the two of them prepared to continue their journey. As they moved along the trail, the landscape began to change. The flat plains gave way to rolling hills, and patches of dense brush appeared along the sides of the path. John guided the wagon carefully, keeping an eye out for loose rocks and hidden dips in the trail. Naomi walked beside him, scanning the surroundings with sharp eyes. She pointed out areas where the horses might stumble or where the ground was weak, and John followed her guidance. He felt a growing sense of trust in her judgment, knowing that her knowledge of the land could prevent disaster. The morning passed uneventfully until they reached a narrow canyon flanked by steep cliffs. The trail became difficult, winding through rocks and loose gravel. John slowed the wagon, carefully maneuvering around obstacles. Suddenly, a distant shout echoed through the canyon. John froze, listening intently. Naomi stiffened beside him, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the cliffs and the surrounding brush. The sound was followed by another shout, closer this time, and then the unmistakable sound of horses galloping. John's heart pounded. They were not alone. Naomi motioned for him to stop the wagon and crouch low, signaling that danger was near. She whispered, "Bandits. They are trying to catch travelers along the trail. Stay calm." John's stomach tightened with fear, but he nodded. He knew she was right. The frontier was unpredictable, and some travelers were willing to risk theft and violence to survive or profit. He quickly checked the wagon, making sure the grain was secured and the horses were ready for any sudden movement. The bandits appeared shortly after, emerging from the shadows of the canyon. 3 riders, masked and armed, charged toward them, shouting demands. "Stop. Leave the goods and no one gets hurt," one of them called. John's mind raced, trying to calculate their options. Surrendering the grain was one possibility, but it would leave him without supplies for his town. Fighting was risky, and they were outnumbered. He glanced at Naomi, who met his gaze with a calm, determined expression. She motioned for him to follow her lead, and John understood that this was a moment that would test both their courage and their resourcefulness. Naomi sprang into action, moving swiftly to the side of the trail where a narrow path led to higher ground. "Follow me," she shouted, guiding the horses with precise commands. John followed, maneuvering the wagon carefully along the rocky incline. The bandits tried to block them, but Naomi's knowledge of the terrain gave them an advantage. She pointed out loose stones that could be kicked to unbalanced pursuers and hidden dips that could slow them down. John realized that her quick thinking was their best chance of escape. The chase was tense and dangerous. Rocks slipped under the horses' hooves, and the wagon jolted sharply as John steered it over rough terrain. Naomi remained calm, issuing instructions in short, clear commands. "Keep the horses steady. Don't let the wheels hit the edge," she called. John followed her guidance, marveling at her ability to stay composed under pressure. The bandits struggled to keep up, their horses faltering on the uneven ground. John realized that without Naomi, they would have been easy prey. Finally, they reached a narrow plateau that overlooked the canyon. John stopped the wagon, breathing heavily, while Naomi scanned the area for signs of the bandits. The riders were still in pursuit, but the plateau gave John and Naomi a tactical advantage. Naomi whispered, "We can slow them here. The path is too narrow for all 3 to come at once." She picked up a few loose rocks and rolled them down the slope, creating obstacles that forced the bandits to slow their charge. John joined her, tossing stones with precision to block their path. The bandits were cautious now, and the two of them gained precious moments to plan their next move. As they prepared to continue, one of the bandits attempted to flank them, moving along a hidden path on the side of the plateau. Naomi noticed immediately. "He's trying to circle around," she shouted. John reacted instinctively, guiding the wagon to block the narrow path while Naomi positioned herself to confront the rider. With careful timing, she caused the bandit to stumble over a loose rock, sending him tumbling down the slope. The remaining riders hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. John realized that Naomi's bravery and skill had turned the tide in their favor. The bandits, realizing they were at a disadvantage, began to retreat. Their shouts echoed through the canyon as they disappeared from sight, leaving John and Naomi alone on the plateau. John exhaled deeply, the adrenaline slowly leaving his body. He turned to Naomi, who stood calmly beside the wagon, her dark eyes still alert. "That was incredible," he said, still catching his breath. Naomi nodded without pride, simply acknowledging the situation. "We must always be prepared," she said quietly. "The land is full of dangers, and not everyone we meet has good intentions." The encounter left John shaken but also deeply impressed. He realized that Naomi was more than a companion. She was a protector, a strategist, and someone whose courage and intelligence could not be underestimated. He felt a sense of gratitude and respect that went beyond mere words. In that moment, he understood that their bond was no longer just about necessity. It was about trust, mutual reliance, and shared experience. After the danger had passed, they continued their journey, moving cautiously through the canyon. John kept a close eye on the trail, while Naomi scanned the surroundings for any sign of further threats. The adrenaline of the chase had subsided, but the lessons remained clear. They were stronger together than they had been alone, and the challenges of the frontier required not only skill, but also trust and cooperation. John felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that he had found a companion whose abilities and wisdom matched his own determination. As the sun began to set, they reached a small valley with a gentle stream running through it. John decided it was a safe place to rest for the night. He unharnessed the horses and set up a small camp, while Naomi gathered firewood and prepared a simple meal. The evening was quiet, filled only with the sounds of the stream and the occasional call of a distant bird. John and Naomi sat together by the fire, sharing a few words about the day's events. There was no need for excessive conversation. The shared experience had created a bond deeper than words could describe. That night, as they slept under the stars, John reflected on the events of the day. He thought about the danger they had faced, the courage Naomi had shown, and the lessons he had learned about trust and resilience. The frontier was unpredictable and often harsh, but it was also a place of growth, understanding, and connection. John realized that this journey was no longer simply about grain or survival. It was about learning, adapting, and recognizing the value of the people who walked alongside him. And so, as the night stretched on and the stars shone brightly above, John and Naomi rested, ready to face the challenges of the next day. The turning point had passed, but its lessons remained. The journey ahead would continue to test their courage, intelligence, and partnership, but John felt certain that together, they could overcome whatever lay ahead. The bond formed in that moment of danger would guide them through the trials yet to come, shaping not only their journey but their understanding of trust, respect, and human connection. The morning sun rose slowly over the plains, casting a warm golden light across the trail. John Miller stirred from his blanket, stretching his stiff muscles from the long night. The events of the previous day, the chase, the narrow escape, and Naomi's calm bravery still ran through his mind like a vivid memory. He knew that today would be a different day, calmer but no less important. They had survived the immediate danger, but the journey back to Santa Fe was far from over. Each mile traveled reminded John that the frontier demanded patience, resilience, and careful attention. Naomi was already awake, kneeling beside the wagon as she inspected the horses. Her movements were steady, practiced, and confident. John admired her efficiency and focus. She had proven herself time and again during the journey, and he now understood that she was far more than a companion. She was a partner, equal in skill, intelligence, and courage. As he helped harness the horses, he felt a sense of gratitude that went beyond words. He realized that their journey had changed him, not just in skill or survival, but in understanding the value of trust, respect, and human connection. They traveled through rolling hills and grassy plains, the morning light illuminating the beauty of the landscape. Birds sang in the trees, and the occasional rustle of a small animal in the underbrush reminded them of the life teeming in the wilderness. John guided the wagon with care, watching the horses and the trail ahead. Naomi walked beside him, alert and observant, offering advice whenever she noticed a change in the terrain. Together, they moved as a team, their actions synchronized and their trust in each other growing stronger with every step. As the day progressed, John began to speak more openly with Naomi. He asked her about her past, about her life before the trading post, and about the lessons she had learned on the trail. Naomi responded thoughtfully, sharing stories of survival, observation, and the importance of understanding the land. She spoke of the ways her people had navigated the challenges of the frontier for generations, and how knowledge, patience, and respect had always been their strongest tools. John listened carefully, absorbing her wisdom and reflecting on the journey that had brought them together. The conversation deepened their bond, but John also realized that he needed to make decisions about what lay ahead. The grain he carried was intended for his town, and his responsibility to his community weighed heavily on him. At the same time, he knew that Naomi was no ordinary companion. She was a person of intelligence and dignity, not property or possession. He wrestled with the moral complexity of their situation. How could he honor both his responsibilities and the humanity of someone who had become such an integral part of his journey? By mid-afternoon, they reached a small, shaded grove near a gentle stream. The location was perfect for a rest, and John decided to take a break before continuing. He unhitched the horses and allowed them to drink, while Naomi gathered firewood and prepared a simple meal. As they ate, John realized that the journey had taught him much about cooperation, patience, and the strength of character. Naomi's calm, steady presence had guided him through moments of danger and uncertainty, and he felt a growing sense of admiration and respect for her. After the break, they continued on the trail, moving steadily toward Santa Fe. The landscape began to change as they approached the outskirts of the town. Fields and small farms appeared, and the distant smoke from chimneys indicated that people were already preparing for the evening. John felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. They were nearing the end of their journey, but he knew that the decisions he would make in the coming days could have lasting consequences for both himself and Naomi. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange, pink, and purple, John and Naomi reached the outskirts of Santa Fe. The familiar sights and sounds of the town, people moving about, the clatter of carts and the distant laughter of children, welcomed them back. John felt a sense of accomplishment. They had faced dangers, overcome challenges, and grown through shared experience. Yet, he also knew that this was a moment of decision. The journey had changed him, and he could not simply return to the routines of the past. He needed to consider Naomi's future with the same care and respect he had shown throughout their travels. John led the wagon through the town to his home, where neighbors gathered curiously to see the trader who had returned from the frontier. The grain was unloaded, stacked carefully for the coming winter, and the community expressed gratitude for John's efforts. Yet, John's mind was not on the applause or thanks. It was on Naomi and the choices that lay ahead. He approached her, speaking quietly. You have traveled far with me, and you have proven your strength, wisdom, and courage. I cannot simply treat you as property or obligation. You have your freedom, and I want you to have a future where your choices are your own." Naomi listened, her dark eyes meeting his with calm intensity. She did not speak immediately, but the quiet understanding between them was palpable. John continued, "I can provide for you, help you establish a place in the town, or ensure you have a safe path wherever you choose to go. But it must be your decision, not mine." Naomi nodded slowly, a faint smile touching her lips. She understood the gravity of the offer and the respect behind it. For the first time, John felt a deep sense of relief. He had honored her as a person, not just a companion on a journey. Over the next few days, John and Naomi worked together to establish her independence. John introduced her to trusted neighbors who could provide guidance, resources, and shelter. Naomi explored the town cautiously, learning about its routines, people, and opportunities. She maintained her quiet composure, observing carefully, asking questions, and offering advice when appropriate. John watched with pride as she navigated this new environment with the same intelligence, resilience, and grace that had guided them through the frontier. During this time, John reflected on the journey that had begun so simply with the purchase of grain. The experience had transformed him, teaching him lessons about morality, responsibility, and the value of human dignity. He had begun the journey focused solely on survival and duty, but it had grown into a story of trust, respect, and personal growth. Naomi had not only helped him navigate the physical challenges of the frontier, but had also guided him through the moral and emotional lessons he had learned along the way. One afternoon, as they walked along the edge of the town, John asked Naomi what she planned to do next. She paused, considering carefully, then spoke. "I have learned much from this journey, and I am grateful, but my path is mine. I will remain here for a time, learn, and decide where I am needed. The world is large, and I will find my way." John nodded, understanding that her independence was not a rejection, but a continuation of the strength and intelligence she had shown throughout their travels. He felt a deep respect for her choice, recognizing that true partnership included freedom, not control. The following weeks passed with the town preparing for the winter. John continued his trade, ensuring that the community had enough food and supplies. Naomi remained in town, gradually building connections and learning the routines of the settlement. Their bond remained strong, rooted in mutual respect and shared experience. John often reflected on the journey, the dangers they had faced, and the lessons they had learned together. He realized that the story of the grain and the frontier had become a story of character, courage, and the human capacity for growth and understanding. As winter approached, John and Naomi met occasionally to discuss the town's preparations and share news of the frontier. Each meeting reinforced the respect and trust between them. John knew that the choices he had made, to honor her independence, to rely on her skills, and to recognize her humanity, were among the most important of his life. Naomi's presence had transformed him, teaching him that true courage and wisdom came not only from surviving challenges, but also from treating others with dignity and respect. Finally, as the first snow began to fall softly over the town, John reflected on the journey from the trading post to Santa Fe. What had begun as a simple task to purchase grain had become a story of survival, partnership, and moral growth. He had faced dangers, made difficult choices, and learned lessons that would stay with him for a lifetime. Naomi, now an independent and respected member of the town, had shared in these lessons, guiding him through moments of fear, uncertainty, and moral challenge. In the quiet of his home, John felt a sense of completion. The grain had been delivered, the town was prepared for winter, and Naomi had found her place. The journey had tested their courage, intelligence, and character, but it had also created a bond built on trust, respect, and shared experience. John knew that the story of the frontier, the grain, and the unexpected companion would remain with him forever. A reminder that life's challenges often bring the greatest opportunities for growth, understanding, and human connection. And so, under the soft glow of the winter sun and the gentle fall of snow, John and Nayeli looked toward the future with hope, wisdom, and mutual respect. The journey had ended, but its lessons, the bond they had formed, and the transformation it had brought would continue to shape their lives, guiding them through whatever challenges lay ahead. The grain had been the beginning, but the true story had been about courage, trust, and the enduring power of human dignity.